In this video, we're going to be focusing on DOM events. Before we saw how to manipulate the page, look for parents, siblings, children, change, some text, add stuff to our tree structure at the very end. So DOM events allow us to register functionality to elements on your website, obviously, so that we could go beyond merely just styling the page, maybe switching out IDs or CSS classes. And now we could start to do more of the things we want to. So say a user moves a mouse, clicks a button, resizes a window, or even the window loads itself. I mean, you guessed it, we can make an event happen for those specific things. So just like CSS, this could get very, very complex, but we're going to start small and then we're going to move up from there. And I've checked around for all the different kinds of events, and it seems like people sometimes break them apart separately, but there's some general similar groupings from all the different events that I've seen people discuss. And those are mouse events, keyboard events, form events, UI events, and focus events. And so we're going to look at all of these today. We're going to break them up into small bite-sized sections. And so in case you're wondering, how do events work? What happens is the first stage is you have to select the element node that you want to have your script respond to. So say you want to click a button, right? You want to go find that button and retrieve it and, possibly store it in a variable. And then the next step is decide what type of event you want to take place. So once again, do you want to have something occur when you click on it or when something else happens? Usually it's not a giant mystery. You already know kind of what you want to do. And then after that, we just have to create the code you want to run when, your ideal event happens. So a user clicks something and they submit some information, or maybe you want to add something to your page because you're making a to-do list. Now, one thing I'm going to note before we start is do not do this below. We see this a tag with an on-click equals, and then I just have some dummy function here called do something. We do not want to do this. Now, if you see maybe other JavaScript libraries or frameworks that do something like this, don't take that and say, well, they're doing it there, so I should do it here. The reason is we want to practice good housekeeping. And so we don't want our UI loaded, right now at least, unnecessarily with logic. We want to split them up into pieces. So when we look at our functionality, we look at our JavaScript file. When we look at our markup, we go to our HTML file. When we look at how we style something, we want to go to our CSS file. If we have to start guessing what is living in what file, then that's very hard. And we're only maybe working with max 3 files at a time in these videos. But when you work on larger projects, that could be a big pain in the ass. So do good housekeeping, separate your logic out, and until you get into some advanced other way of coding, which there are out there, for now, don't use the on click or the on blur or whatever attributes that are a part of the elements that you use in HTML. Just select them in your JavaScript and they'll be just as good. So let's get to looking at some of the events that we could do, some small examples, and then, let's just go have fun. All right, so let's go to our first round of events here. I mentioned some off at the beginning of the video, but I'm going to break these up so we can just do them section by section. So we're not going to be using our style sheet. There's nothing in there, so you can import it if you want to, but we're not going to be using it. Our index.js file is cleared out, and we just have our standard, what we've been working with for our markup in here. So I've changed the title to events because I always want to change it because I think that's fun. And so let's go ahead and fill out the page. We're going to have a button, an H3, another button, and then we're going to have a form. And we're going to give them some, IDs, and then go into our JavaScript here and make them do stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. So your page now should look something very similar to this. You should have a button here with an ID of button, and the text says mouse event. This could be whatever you want it to. Then we have an H3 with an ID of H-3, and then we have the X and then the Y here. Maybe that was going to be a tip off to what we're going to be doing. Then we have a button down here with an ID of drag, and it says drag me. And then we have form, and then we have an input in here, and it has a type of text, which is, I think, important for this. And then we have an ID equal to text. So let's go ahead and I'll drag this down here. And what we're going to do first is we're going to look at a mouse event. And what we're going to do is we're going to get the first mouse event right here, this button, and we're going to make it do something when we click it. So we're going to add a event to it. So let's go ahead and get started here. We're doing get element by ID. We've done this before. We've also made typos before. And so now you may be thinking, oh, this is going to be kind of hard. You know, it's going to be a lot of code to do something. And really, it's not. We do button, add event listener. We can come in here. And our first argument that comes in is click. And you see it autofills for us. And this is the kind of event we are looking for. That's pretty cool. And then we have this, which is just an anonymous function. And it's anonymous because you notice we're not going to give it a name at all, if I could type correctly. And we're going to make an alert happen that says you won 1,000 Bitcoin. Now, is that 1,000 individual Bitcoin or $1,000 in Bitcoin? I'll let you play that out in your head. So we have both of these saved right here. And so whenever we click on this, it's getting the ID. And then we are saying, hey, we want a click to happen. And then afterward, we're setting this function off. And we could have easily, you will see other things like this. You'll see like function. You'll see that in some examples as well. But I like using this right here. So let's go ahead and come here and click mouse event. And we see it says you won 1,000 Bitcoin. And it was that easy. All we did was look at this and say, hey, okay, that's what I want. I want to, when I click it with a mouse, I want something to happen. And then inside of these squiggly brackets right here, I just want to send out an alert that does this. Now, alerts are okay if you're doing stuff locally. You typically don't want to do alerts when you do stuff professionally. There's other things you could have pop up on your screen that are helpful. Plus, if your code goes wrong, you may spam people with alerts, and browsers have built-in technology that may stop these from happening. So alerts are kind of like console logs from what we've been seeing, except they appear like on the window itself, and you don't have to go looking anywhere else in your code. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and let's do something with that H3. So let's go ahead and get that H3. Once again, autocomplete's not working there for me. Get element by ID. H-3 is what we said it was. And then, as you guessed it, add event listener. And we're going to do a mouse move we're going to come in here and we're going to send up this thing called an event. And whenever you send up an event, and we could have done it right here, and it still works. The event is the actual event, the information coming on up from what we clicked or just did. And there's a bunch of attributes that the event has. And so let's go ahead and type this out and I'll explain it. And what we're going to do is get the XY coordinates. Now this may sound very mathy, but it's one line and it's pretty easy to explain here. So now that we have this right here, we have the inner HTML we've seen before. So this is going to be the text that we have. And we're going to replace it with this X : space. And then we're going to get the event itself. And then where at on the screen, on the X axis, we're going to get this value. And so this is as we move it. And then for Y, what we're going to do is do the same thing, but for the Y axis. So we're going to come up here and we see nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. But now, let me actually move this on over here. There we go. Now, if I go below, I'm actually obviously not hovering on the H3 right now, right? But as I get into its range right here, you know, with CSS, maybe I make the padding bigger or something. But now you see that, in fact, I'm influencing the X and Y, and it's picking up as my mouse moves over it, what are the coordinates? And so you may think, oh, this is dumb. I'm not using this for anything. But what if you want to make a game? What if you want to do something when the user is about ready to move off of the page and you get a pop-up that says, hey, before you leave, subscribe to our newsletter? Or maybe it's an animation, or maybe they're scrolling somewhere, and when you hit a certain Y or X value, you want an event to occur that will help the user, get curated through your website. So knowing where the mouse is at could get a lot of very useful information for you. So this may seem like a dumb, silly thing for now, but once again, this is one of those techniques and things you have now, unveiled to you, where you could start to do some very, very creative stuff. And if nothing else, if you like CSS, you could start merging your CSS and JavaScript together and do some pretty epic animations. So the next thing we're going to look at here is a keyboard event. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get the window here. And what we're going to do next is actually, I realized in my code I didn't do anything with drag. So I'm going to remove this. So sorry if you typed it out. Getting rid of it right there. As it happens, we have multiple nodes scattered across multiple screens. But anyway, let's go back to our keyboard event here. And we have this add event listener. And we're appending it to the window. You notice we typically have stuff going on with a document or document right here. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to append this to the window object here. And so this is kind of, in a very simple terms, kind of like the all-encompassing object that you're going to deal with. So we're going to send up the event. And we're going to console log event .key. So we're going to come in here. We're going to hit inspect. We're going to go to our console. So now we just clicked inside of here, and I'm going to type G. And it says console is not a function. That's because I did console. There we go. Corrected that. Let's go in here and hit G again. Let's hit G again. Let's type LOL. Let's type my dog's name. And so now we're able to pick up other keys that we see. We see that I did shift, and then I was able to get this ampersand right here. But if I hold shift down, it, you know, makes it repeat multiple times over and over and over again. So that's something that you should keep note of and be aware of. And so even if I hit space, it's tracking space on here. So think of this also for games or other kind of functionality you want to add, maybe in a web application. And so I know that there has been apps I've seen where, you know, maybe they give you certain hotkeys to maneuver an app more quickly. And so these are some of the other creative things that you could add to your website to, you know, do some enhancements to make your user's experience a lot better. All right, so now we're going to look at a form event. And what we're going to do actually is we're going to update this from text. We're going to do input hyphen text here, just to give it a bit more, I don't know, uniqueness in the name. Because we have type text, and then I just thought it would be kind of bad practice to keep going. Even though these are small examples, I'm just going to do that change right now. This is what happens when you have a zillion videos and you're trying to get everything organized and you catch stuff in real time where you're like, yeah, I don't want to do that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get that input text, add event listener as we typically have been doing. We want to blur. We're going to have our anonymous, or not anonymous. Well, it is anonymous, but it's our fat arrow function because that arrow is looking pretty thick. But text equals document. We're going to get the element by ID. And you may be thinking, well, this is kind of weird. It's like we're getting this, and then we're getting this again right here. What gives? Well, this first thing right here is what we're going to do. We're going to get the element, and we're adding an event listener. But then that may not be the only thing that we need from that element, because all we're doing is adding an event listener, but there's an input, so we need to get the text. So let's come down here and do console.log text value. So once again, just these simple lines right here, we're going to come in and type Bob, and we see that we're now able to log out the data that is being saved in here. If I wanted to come in here and do, actually, let me remove that. I just tripped myself up there. So now we do Bernie, and nothing's happening. But if we click off, we see that Bernie on blur. So when the focus gets removed, it populates here in our console log. So at this point, we have access when it removes the focus to that text. And so if we were to have a form and then like a submit button down here, you know, as soon as everything leaves blur, we can then, you know, submit our data, or we are now in control of the value of that data that's being input, which is super cool. So these are some of the event listeners you could have right here. We obviously have the, you know, mouse events, the clicking, the mouse move. We have the keyboard events. We have the form events. And so what we're going to do in the next section is go over, I think, the remaining 2 or 3. I'm not looking at the list right now of events we have. And then we're going to build a website showing you how easy it is to do stuff using event listeners. In the last section, we've already done some stuff with the, you know, different kinds of events. We have some mouse, keyboard, form. This is also, you know, I say form, but we're using blur, so it's kind of also, you know, a focus event here. But there's 2 more I wanted to, I say focus, but now I'm going to say focus twice, that I want to focus on, which is a UI event, and then another, you know, mix between a focus and a form event, because you could have, you know, different intersections for what you want to do. So the first, let's do a UI event, and let's do load, because what if we want something to happen when the page loads? That's pretty easy to do. We could do window, add event listener, come into here, Once again, if you don't know this stuff off the top of your head, that's cool. Just look it up. And let me actually just move this down here. There we go. This is going to be much nicer to read. So now we're going to focus on the window object. And then actually, wrong thing there. There we go. And then we're just going to alert when page loaded. And we see that it loaded. Let's refresh this. Hey, it loaded. Sweet. So now imagine that there's a bunch of extra code you need to do, or when a page loads, you want to then kick off something that goes and gets some data from elsewhere or produces data, or anything else you could possibly think of, right? And now we could detect when the user actually comes to your page, you could start kicking off a whole bunch of cool stuff that hopefully enhances their user experience. The next section here is we're going to do another focus form event, just because I feel another one would be necessary here. And we have document. We're going to get the element by ID of the input text right there. Add event listener. Paste. And then we're just going to alert when something has been pasted. So we're going to alert to the screen like we did in our previous example when it loads that something's been pasted. So page loaded. All right, cool. All right, that's cool. So we want to grab this, and it's kind of hard, so we just have to double click. Control C, and then we're going to Control V into here, and it says pasted. And now we have our value in here. So that's the way you can detect when something has been pasted in to your code. So maybe, in your futures, when you become future professors or instructors, you could detect when someone is pasting code into a form, and you could then automatically give them a pop-up that says, sorry, you might be cheating, and you could just nuke the entire text area or input and make them type it out manually. So not say I'm going to do that with any kind of test or anything, but these are some of the options you have. The possibilities are unlimited. I hope you have fun with this. And then in the next section, we're actually going to build out a very 90s-esque, very color uncoordinated website using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And yeah, it's just a big to-do list, and I hope you all join me. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take some of the stuff we learned, and we're going to make a website with CSS and JavaScript. And so we're going to break this down into 3 parts. We're going to do the markup, we're going to do the CSS, and then we're going to do the JavaScript at the very end. Now, one thing to note is I've obviously done all these. I have the code laid out already. So if there's some styling things where I'm not a good styler, let's just be honest. I have an eye for some things, but mainly not. And in your careers, I would say a good majority, 70 to 80% of the time, like I said, it depends. You may have a graphic designer or a design team or someone help you out with the visuals. They may give you a screenshot or some kind of image that they made in Photoshop or some other program, and they say, try and make this. And that's how it's traditionally been for me, but that's usually if something is public facing. So if you have something that your internal employees in your company may see, you may not get that level of feedback because obviously you're not, making as much money off of them as you would, a public user. So try your best. Your first attempt isn't always going to be your best. And, that's what iteration's all about. So let's stop the talking and let's go and start the coding. So first we're going to change the title. The next thing we're going to do is just add our markup in. So let's do that right now. Now we have this right here. We have this do it with JS, the goal right here. And we have, let me go ahead and collapse this. We've already been working with these files, so we already know what's going to be in here. We're not using assets, so I'm just going to collapse this in for now and move this on over. And so we have our text area right here. We have our button down below right here sitting next to it to add to the list. And here's our list right now. Everything looks, kind of junky, right? This is not somewhere you would probably want to go and do stuff. So let's come in, pop this open right here. And now what we could do is start to work on the CSS. So I'm going to pull this back on over, collapse that over here. And I'm just going to start at the top of my other file on my other screen and work my way down. And for the stuff that is like linear gradient, there's actually websites you could go to produce this stuff for you and preview it. So don't think when you see something on the screen and you're like, oh, that's advanced CSS. Maybe it is, but there's a lot of sites out there that'll generate this stuff for you. So once again, you could just piece your website together rather than, reinvent the wheel over again. So for our body, we're going to do this. And this section right here, I'm going to copy and paste this over just to save some time. But whenever you see me in these tutorials in this, series, do something like this, I straight up just went to a website and designed this right here. I mean, this looks pretty bad. I'm going to update this because I was just playing around with linear gradients. And I went to a website and it's generated this for me. So yes, you may think it's terrible looking, and I may agree, but I get to have fun too, right? So now let's go to our H1 that we have. Let's do a font size of 72 pixels. And then once again, let's do I'm going to copy this in from my other screen. And then we're going to add these in. WebKit, background, flip text right here, and fill color, and we're going to do transparent. And now we get this right here. And this was a technique that I just looked up with the background and the two WebKit attributes here. And this is how I got to have a gradient looking, H1 element here. So I didn't know how to do this off the top of my head. That's just how things go sometimes. And so you just Google make gradient font and you'll get a pattern that looks like this. And you could just copy this straight into your code. Nothing wrong with that. It's not cheating. And now you have this dark blue to light blue background with this pink to peach looking text here. And yeah, just have fun with it. So let's go ahead and work on our H2 next. Give it a font size of 62 and do a color of white. We're going to come back over here. All right, cool. We have this figured out. So now let's go next to our paragraph tag. And kind of the reason I'm doing it this way, because I could have sat and made something that looks like way better, maybe. But the issue is that what you're seeing here, and this stuff looks terrible. There's websites you could go to where you could see what the internet looked like in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I'm not saying it all looked like this, but some of it looked like this. Some of it was just horrible looking. And that's before all the professionalism and, all the businesses started investing heavily into their online presence. So when I like to make, intro websites like this, I like to make them a little extra late 90s looking because, well, that's when I was using the internet first. So we're going to come into our text area here. So we're going to access that directly. And I'm just going to do another wacky gradient thing. So I'm going to copy this on over. And feel free to pause the videos in this section or just look at my code in GitHub. Don't forget to star that stuff. And just copy what I have if you're lazy like I am. So then we're going to do color white, not wote. Border, 1 pixel, solid, white. Display, block, margin, bottom, we're going to give it 30 pixels. So if you remember before, we had the button sitting right next to the text area. So now that this is block, it's shoving this down right here, which is pretty cool. Once again, it helps to know stuff like that. For a button, we're going to do a width of 300 pixels. Let's see, the color is going to be D5 3369. Nice. And then because I clearly, when I created this code, had a problem and was overusing this linear gradient stuff. God, this looks terrible. But this is so reminiscent of the 90s for me. So we're going to come down here, and our last thing we're going to do is the unordered list. We're going to font size this up to 45 pixels. List style is going to be none, because we don't want that dotted list look there. And once again, because I can't stay away from terrible looking styles, I'm doing some more linear gradients. And then we see this text transparent pattern that I was using up here. And I selected the wrong thing. So there we go. And now we have go pick up Bernie. So now we have this extremely ugly looking website, which is awesome. You all should be proud if you're following along now. Because remember, the goal is to learn how to make a website, not how to be the best designer on the planet. A web designer is a different skill, I would say, than a web developer, although, you know, it helps to know what looks good. But your goal should be loading in the CSS, loading in the JavaScript, which is what we're going to do next. And as you get more suggestions on what maybe you should do with this website, you will have the skill and the competency to come back in here and say, okay, I need to change this text. Okay, this is what I'm changing the background to. So never beat yourself up if something isn't pretty. I'm clearly not. I'm making a YouTube video about it. So now we're going to come into here and we want to add to this list, right? So let's come in and let's do document, get element by ID. We're going to get list adder, add event listener. We're going to click something. We have that anonymous function sitting up there. So what we're going to do is we're going to get text, give it a little space there. All right, so now we have the value of our text from the text box. So next what we want to do is append it to the list. And we can't append just the text to the list. We have to construct the element. So now we're going to create the element. So we have a list item. So now we need the text node, because if you remember, there's elements, but then when we were talking about nodes specifically, you know, there's the line item in this case, or the list item, but then you have to attach a text node to it. Otherwise, there'll be, you know, no text there. We're going to do a create text node. Awesome. There's already one built in there for us. And we're going to get our content from our text box. So what we're going to do is get the text from here, that whatever it is we type in, and we're going to store that. We're going to create another list item. So right now we have go pick up Bernie, which he actually left my room right now. He's probably sleeping in the living room. And then we're going to take this text, create a text node here, assign it to this value. And then now we're going to do list element dot append child text node. But that's still not enough. So now that we have that list item, the next thing we need to do is add it to the list. We're going to do document dot get element by ID to-do list. And then we're going to append the list element. And then we got to do some housekeeping. And that is clear the text area. Because you never want to get into a spot where the previous text just sits there, because what if you add the same thing multiple times, right? That's a bad end user experience. You always want to think about the frustration you've had with websites, and then when you go to create them, you want to, you know, walk around those issues. You don't want to make websites that frustrates other people. You know, you want a very seamless experience. So now that we have this should work. So I'm going to come in here. So go pick up Bernie. The next thing I'm going to do is take him home. All right, let's see if this works. And we have take him home. Oh, that's pretty dope. That is really cool. And then feed him. So that's pretty neat. All right. And then play with Bernie. And then I take a nap because he is exhausting. That dog has unlimited energy. And this is it. So this is in under like 20-ish minutes here. Granted, you know, if I did this alone or you did this alone, it'd probably be even like a quarter of the time. But this is just a very, very simple way you can add functionality into a website. You could style it to look at, you know, make it look gaudy like mine is. But now you have your first like full-blown website using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So yeah, give yourselves a pat on the back and just think where you're going to be, you know, in 10 or 15 years from now and the stuff you're going to be developing. So I appreciate you watching.